So what's the coding environment like for C? Generally, you need a C compiler. And what that does is it translates the original program, which is called the source code, into what is called an executable file called the object code. So you use some kind of editor to type in the commands and then save them in a file, in a program file. So the cycle of steps is you create the file and save the file using an editor, and then you use a compiler to compile it, and then you execute it. There are many integrated development environments, or IDEs for short, that integrate the editor, the compiler, and other features as well. So that's generally how it works with a compiler. It should be noted, however, that there are also some C interpreters. So it's possible to have a C interpreter, although generally what we'll have is a C compiler. The bottom line is that there are lots of different C compilers, and they don't always work in the same way. So you have what would be called standard C compilers, and those must conform to very strict guidelines on what exactly you have in the language, what constructs, what library functions you have, and how they work. But there are lots of C compilers that are not standard. So a little bit of history. The American National Standards Institute, C was the original standard version of the language C. That was created in 1989, so sometimes it's called C89. There have been new standards that have been subsequently adopted by both ANSI and by the International Standards Organization. There are a couple of versions that were ratified in 1999 and 2011, and those are frequently referred to as C99 and C11. And then you have C++ that was derived from C, basically the C language plus more, plus object-oriented programming. And then once C++ was created, some C compilers started to use some of the constructs from C++. So bottom line, it's a mishmash. There are lots of different C compilers, so what I'm going to show you in C may or may not work exactly the same way with your C compiler, depending on what compiler you have. So you need to be careful about that and just pay attention to the documentation for your particular compiler. All right, here's the general outline of a C program. So generally in the file you have things that are called preprocessor directives to begin with, and those do things like include header files, and the header files are essentially built-in libraries of built-in functions. So you start with these preprocessor directives, then you define constants, whatever constants you want to have in your program, and then you have the main function, which for now is going to contain all of the actual code. This is an example of an outline of a main function. So the main function looks like this. It starts with the first line, which is called the function header, this int main and then empty parentheses. That's the function header. And then all of the actual code will go in between these curly braces. So the left curly brace and the right curly brace. So all of the actual lines of code will go in here. And then at the bottom we have this thing that says return 0. So we'll get into this more when we talk about writing our own functions. But basically, again, this is the function header. What this says is that the name of the function is main. We're not passing any arguments to it, but we do need the empty parentheses. And this first part here says that the function actually returns an integer, which is what happens down here. We're returning a 0. This is required by some C compilers, not required by all, but it's sort of a good idea. And we'll get to more about what this actually is, but this is basically, this return 0, which is an integer, is basically saying that, hey, the program worked okay. So again, we have the function header here, that's the first line, and the rest of this is what's called the body of the function, where you have all of your statements and then this return 0 at the very end.